Okay.
All right, as usual, I have some brief introductory remarks about the topic and a question that we can kick off the discussion with, but we don't need to use my question. We could go anywhere and everywhere you guys want to. So let's start with a working definition of gossip. Gossip is simply the sharing of information, both positive and negative, about individuals not present in the conversation. And I think it's important to remember that gossip can be positive as well as negative. And it's useful to think of gossip as a social tool, essentially. And like any tool, it can be used for good or ill. We tend to have ambivalent feelings about gossip, I think. Jane Austen said, quote, every man is surrounded by a neighborhood of voluntary spies, close quote. On the other hand, Oscar Wilde famously quipped that there is only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. So most of us, I think, have experienced how hard it can be to resist sharing a juicy piece of news about someone or listening if someone wants to share such news with you. I think this is likely because gossiping is hardwired into our species because it was adaptive in small hunter-gatherer groups. So let me talk about some ways gossip would have been adaptive and beneficial in human evolution. When you're in a small hunter-gatherer tribe, you need to collaborate in hunting, in gathering, in child rearing, and that means you need to know who to trust. Your survival depends on cooperation and trust within the group. But as the size of these groups grew, it became difficult to monitor everybody's behavior directly. Gossip enables you to keep track of who is trustworthy, cooperative, and dependable, and who is selfish, deceitful, and unreliable. In short, gossip spreads useful social information about others in your group, and this information enhances both individual survival and group cohesion and stability. Secondly, gossip facilitated social bonding. That is, it fostered a sense of connection and trust within the group. This helped cooperation, and again, then that helped survival. Some anthropologists have suggested that gossip functions like social grooming does in primates. And, instead of picking insects off each other's bodies, we bond by sharing information and thereby establishing trust. A third way, Plato said, quote, when men speak ill of thee, live so as nobody may believe them, close quote. In other words, gossip helps bring people back in line with social norms. So gossip can be a form of social control. It helps regulate behavior in a group, and that reduces conflicts and therefore, again, enhances cooperation. If you have fear of violating group expectations, for example, by hoarding rather than sharing food, then fear of being gossiped about that and having your reputation damaged will encourage you to behave in ways that benefit the larger group. Fourth, reputations matter. They still do, but they really did in small hunter-gatherer groups. And so gossip was essentially used for reputation management. You could strategically share positive information about yourself or negative information about rivals, and that you could improve your social status and lower the social status of rivals by doing so. And that would increase your chances of forming alliances, finding mates, gaining resources, etc. Gossip also helps solve the problem of free riders and cheats. When individuals know they may be talked about, they're less likely to engage in deceitful or selfish behaviors for fear of the reputational damage I just talked about. Being labeled a free rider or a cheat can lead to social ostracism, which, as we know in hunter-gatherer tribes, was far more perilous than it might be now. So gossip can help ensure that individuals contribute fairly to group efforts. Uh, Next, gossip requires complex cognitive abilities. You have to have a theory of mind, you have to have a memory, And so the cognitive demands of gossip, like remembering social networks, remembering reputations, understanding motives, predicting the consequences of sharing certain information, may have contributed to the evolution of human intelligence. Lastly, gossip allows for vicarious learning. You can learn about social risks and rewards and punishments by observation without trial and error learning yourself. And this helped maintain social harmony as well as bootstrap vicarious learning as a more general human capability. I want to wrap up my opening remarks by talking a little bit about gossip in the modern world, in modern societies. I don't need to know the latest news about Britney Spears to survive, do I? I don't think so. But gossip still is around. So first, we still mostly gossip in small groups. We mostly gossip in friendship networks, in workplaces, in families, other types of social groups. And if you stop and think about it, in that context, gossip still serves the same functions as it did in the past that I just listed. It helps people bond, maintain social connections, manage their reputations. However, with the rise of social media, gossip has taken on new forms and unprecedented scope. Most of the checks and balances that regulated gossip and made it beneficial are missing online. Gossiping on social media, I think, is a good example of evolutionary mismatch when traits evolved to be advantageous in ancestral environments are maladaptive or harmful in our modern environment. So let me just mention a couple observations about this mismatch, and then I'll have a question I'll toss it open with. First, Winston Churchill famously said, quote, "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on." The scale and the speed of gossip online are exponentially more than it's been for 99% of human history. Social media is gossip on steroids. Online gossip can quickly spiral out of control, spread rapidly, reach millions of people, and impact a reputation on a global scale. Secondly, anonymity and accountability are usually missing online. In small groups where gossip evolved, gossip carries consequences for both the gossiper and the target. You're held accountable if you spread false information or harmful rumors in a small group. But these types of checks and balances are missing online, and therefore gossip can more often lead to malicious, unverified, and exaggerated rumors, which are far less likely to occur in face-to-face interactions. Third, the social context is missing online. On social media, people gossip about people they don't know, celebrities, public figures, strangers, and about situations they know little about. That's not what gossip was like in most of human evolution. This new situation is much more likely to lead to inaccurate and misleading narratives than would happen in a small face-to-face group. And also, as you all know, online gossip often takes place in bubbles or echo chambers. And when you share information and it's evaluated only by people that share your beliefs and values, it's much easier for false information to be accepted as truth. Two more. In hunter-gatherer tribes, there was no real equivalent to cancel culture or cyberbullying. One of the purposes of gossip in a small group was to encourage you to adjust your behavior and restore your reputation and good standing in the community. In contrast, online gossip often leads to criticism and rejection that is exaggerated and permanent, and you have no easy way to undo it the way you could have in a small group. So the psychological effects of online gossiping can be much more devastating. And lastly, in small groups, reputation is generally authentic and earned. It's based on real relationships and actual and repeated interactions. In contrast, online reputations are often inauthentic and rest on rumors, scandals, or manufactured personas that people put a lot of effort into creating. So that's my introduction. And I have a question I'll toss out, and you can use this as an initial jumping off point, or if you want to go in another direction, let me know. Why do we gossip about celebrities? Can you think of evolutionary reasons for this tendency? That's clearly something new. There weren't celebrities for most of human evolutionary history. Rob, go ahead. You're muted.
Celebrities are just gods. We gossip about them all the time.
Okay.
They're these sort of imaginary figures onto which people project all manner of qualities.
Okay. And if not gods, they're at least high status individuals.
Right.
And there probably is some evolutionary benefit in hunter-gatherer tribes for gossiping about high status individuals. But Chris, you're muted, Chris.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a status thing. It's kind of related to the idea of I know someone important and I know something about someone important, so it's kind of an affiliation with with status.
Okay.
So I think there's that. I did want to say that I think, you were focusing on things that are controls that aren't there online, but I think those controls are also lacking when we're in person because that's how a lot of misinformation is shared person to person. And I think we've seen that in our current political environment, that you don't need the internet to share and to spread misinformation.
Right. And I guess in person, like on the internet, if your face-to-face interactions also take place in a bubble, if you will, or in an echo chamber, which can happen increasingly in a polarized society where
Yeah.
you just tend to be friends and hang out with people that agree with you about stuff, you can have the same problem that you get with the echo chambers online. Yeah.
Your workplace can be big enough that really totally influences your opinions. Yeah.
Right. So the distinction I made between face-to-face gossip and online gossip, I may have overstated that a little bit. That's a good point, Chris. And I think we have Hank and then Ken.
Yeah, great topic. Scary. And okay. I was in looking at some of the material, I decided to look up different religious groups and the relationship to gossip. I didn't get through all of them, but I did look at Islam. I think I know about Christianity and Judaism. And in Hebrew, the word for gossip is lashon hara, which means evil talk. And in the Quran, the translation for gossip is backbiting. It's a very bad thing, as Donald Trump would say, to do that. Yeah, and I don't know if Allah forgives you. I didn't get that far on it. But I think in terms of establishing norms, why would such a group cohesion, group glue phenomenon be, what do you call it, outlawed? So that's another, when you think about
those definitions leave out the fact that gossip can be positive.
That's right.
If I tell you something about a mutual acquaintance of ours that's praiseworthy, or if I were to say, well, yes, you can lend him money, Hank. I guarantee you, he'll pay you back. He's a man of his word, or whatever. That's gossip, but it's positive gossip about somebody. So, Ken?
one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Hank. Go ahead, Hank.
Just one of the articles talked about 3 types of gossip: positive, negative, and neutral. And so there were a lot of elaborations on within the context of the small face-to-face groups where it's different, like you said, with in terms of anonymous, distant groups, that we have a different phenomenon. There is that evolutionary mismatch. And that'd be useful to get into here, because we're not small groups of 50 or 100 just interacting by ourselves with our neighbors living far away. So I
Yeah.
think the evolutionary mismatch is a bigger factor.
Ken, I'll get to you in a second, but I have to comment on what Diane just put in the chat because I think it's great. She said, echoing Rob's comments about celebrities being gods, celebrities are called idols, which has a religious connotation. And then she said, she quoted from the Ten Commandments, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." So
Mm.
that is one of the Ten Commandments is about spreading false negative information. Very interesting. Ken.
Okay, first of all, this gets back to what I thought might be my first question, which is, and that exactly what is gossip? And my understanding is that gossip is private communication intended to affect one way or the other the reputation of a particular individual. In that case, our conversation about celebrities is not gossip. We're not going to change their reputation.
Sure
We're
we
simply
would. Sure we would.
Yeah.
I mean, if 100,000 people were to say that, George Clooney, I don't know, cheats on his income tax, I mean, that would affect his reputation globally, I think. Sorry to pick on George Clooney. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly, but is that the primary reason? I think people talk about uh, celebrities just because as they're putting on the apron before they're getting to work at the diner, they want to immerse themselves in a more interesting life than they have. It's fantasy, primarily fantasy. The
Okay.
primary motivation is not reputation changing, whereas the motivation of gossip, of to talk about the other woman in our group who's doing something that we don't like. The primary motivation there is reputation change.
I can think, I'm going to go to Kathleen and Diane, but I can think of one way in which if I gossip in a certain way about a celebrity, it can enhance my own reputation. And that's by what's called, by virtue signaling.
Mhm.
If I, go on and condemn a celebrity for taking X, Y, or Z, I'm basically saying, and I'm against that. So I can kind of enhance my own reputation by negative, salacious gossip about a celebrity. Kathleen and then Diane. You're muted, Kathleen.
Can't believe I did that. Okay, so gossip can be neutral though, because it's information sharing. And, so if I hear that, well, maybe some celebrity wore sneakers with a skirt, then it's information sharing. And I suppose the status of the celebrity could lead me to wonder if I should do that too, because they have high status. But very often gossip can at least start out as neutral because we stand to learn so much. Oh, they cook that with butter instead of oil. Should I do that? It's not,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. And as Hank said a moment ago, one of the readings divided gossip into three types, and neutral was one of them. Although it's not the first one that pops to mind. I think mostly, when I think about gossip, initially I think about negative information, and then I have to remind myself there can also be positive information. But I guess a useful additional reminder is there can also be pretty neutral information too. That's not highly charged either negatively or positively. Diane and then Chris and then Ken.
Yeah, I'm sort of replying to Ken, but everybody's more or less on the same topic. It's multifunctional, and so therefore I don't think that there's a primary motivation to gossip. There are a bunch of different motivations to gossip, depending on your situation and who you're with. So you might want to affect the reputation of the other person that you're talking about. Or you might just want to do some bonding with the person that you're talking with, or to show that you're in with the rest of the group, or you may just be giving coalition-related and relevant information. So you could be saying something very good about somebody, which is a recommendation to the other person to, yes, you could trust that person, you can depend on that person, you can expect good things from that person, which I guess is like reputation, but it can also affect personal relationships.
Mhm, mhm. Okay,
Ken looks unhappy with that.
well,
No. And I had my hand up by mistake. I
Okay.
had failed.
Chris, David, Sage, and Hank.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the boundary between gossip and conversation. You know, when I say something to one of my friends about one of my other friends that's neutral information, that doesn't seem like gossip to me. Gossip to me has this feeling like where it raises this emotion. We're like, well, should I really be saying this? And if I'm saying, oh, well, I know so and so is going to this class today at the Y, so you know, you'll have a friend there if you go. Is that gossip or is that just information or conversation? And that doesn't give me I don't have that feeling that I'm gossiping if I say something like that, even though it's information the other person doesn't know. It seems like it has to be something that the person being talked about might consider private.
Chris, that's an excellent point. And you know, I think what you're saying where that would lead is that we would really rule out the idea of neutral gossip. We would say
Right.
gossip, you know, that it goes back to someone's comment early that I think it was Ken, that the intent of gossip is to damage or improve somebody's reputation. And so if you're sharing information that has the potential to damage your friend's reputation or maybe improve your friend's reputation, that's maybe where you feel like, should I be saying this? Because there's real stakes there. If it's they're going to a Zumba class at the Y, you know, that's probably not going to hurt their reputation. Maybe it could enhance it. Or you're kind of saying they're concerned with fitness, so that might be positive information.
But it doesn't feel private, even if it's going to improve their reputation and it doesn't feel like a private thing.
Okay.
That I feel like, you know, if I were to say something like, oh, this person had this particular treatment for their cancer and they were really smart to find it, that starts to feel like gossip because other people might not know that that person had cancer. So there's got to be, to me, there's got to be something private feeling about what I'm talking about.
Okay, that makes sense. David? It doesn't look like you're muted, but we can't hear you. At least I can't. Do you see in the lower
That
left?
better?
Yep, there you are. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good. First of all, and most importantly, wonderful introduction, Steve.
Thank
Your
you.
introductions have been good. This one was outstanding because
Thank you.
you said gossip is not the same now as it was before.
Hmm.
And your example of the local community, then the internet was good. I'm concerned, and I want to hear other people talk about this because I don't understand it. I think we're now in the stage of commercializing gossip. If you turn on the television now, everyone is talking about somebody else, right? And there are television stations whose only approach is to spread gossip, and they get paid.
Magazine.
Well, and TV stations, I'm thinking of, the ones you turn on this to get that because you know what you're going to get. I'm curious what the rest of you think about the evolution of gossip as a commercial activity.
And we've monetized gossip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hank and Rob.
On the same topic about gossip and public gossip, at least I'm going to be a literalist for now. And the old-fashioned gossip was talking behind somebody's back. That's in most of the definitions that I've looked at, about 10 articles, and of course AI. And so can we talk about talking, let's say, badly about others in public as gossip? That would be, if that is, I was thinking about the expertise Donald Trump had in talking badly about people. Well, they may not hear or be at his, they may not hear his, like, you're fat, you're childless, that sort of insult. Now, is insult gossip if it's done in the media? Where
you're even in small groups, you're making that's a really good point, Hank. And so the example that popped into my mind as I was listening was, let's imagine that you signed off this Zoom, and while you were gone for a while, I said something negative about you. That's definitely behind your virtual back, and backbiting was one of the definitions you cited earlier. However, if while you're on the Zoom, I was to proceed to say something negative about you, that's not gossip. It could damage your reputation and it's negative information, but it wouldn't feel and fit the definition of gossip, would it? Does anybody disagree with that? So
well, before, yeah.
good point,
But
really
what
good
about,
point.
yeah, but the online stuff. Now, not every, are you talking, you're shaming somebody or you're boosting them up, but it's online. So it's virtual. You might be listening or you may not. So I'm saying, is that backbiting, or if it's negative, or, because I think we're confusing the old-fashioned gossip, from the old
Yes.
days, where it's a small group, and we have small groups, families, friends, business partners, colleagues. So I think we need to be clear when we address, are we talking about the new kind of gossip and give it a different definition, or the old kind of gossip, which what we're used to and talking about?
I would say that the online kind of sharing of negative information still fits the definition of gossip as you not being present in the conversation. You may eventually, because you're also online, become aware of that negative information. Just like if we're in a small hunter-gatherer group and you're not around, Hank, and I tell everybody something negative about you, you may eventually learn that I did that. And that's the analogy to online, but I think it still fits as gossip. Sage and Rob.
So I just wanted to relate this to this early 2001 paper by Joe Henrich and Robert Boyd. And this actually is a great article on its own right, because it is a model of how multi-level selection and even group selection can occur following cultural group selection after cooperation is established. So what they point to is this sense in which you have a kind of stage approach where you might have just cooperation might not be a norm. And so in this case, thinking about gossip, one of the themes is like, what is the appropriate amount of gossip? And then where is it harmful, right? Like how does that get managed as a norm? And so what they point to is that once there's a norm of, even if it's just to not be harmful, like a reaction around certain kinds of behavior, in this case, harmful gossip, once that's common, then kind of conformist transmission will mean that the harmful and unharmful norms are stabilized. So right now, I think we're in a situation on social media where there isn't a norm that can punish the people who are doing harmful gossip. And in fact, there's actually a benefit to doing so because of that. And so there's a shift that needs to happen from kind of one state to another, where all of a sudden there is a norm against that kind of speech and gossip, such that the costs of doing it are high. And what's really interesting about this whole model, the one thing that I always remember about it, is it hinges not on so much doing the punishing of the person who's done the wrong thing, but on calling out the people who fail to punish that person. It's really about maintenance of that norm at that level. It's like if something happens, right? It might not be your problem, but if you notice that no one else is calling it out, like when people have Nazi flags at a Trump rally and no one calls it out, then you're like, wait a minute.
Well, that feels very timely because the ire there would be more directed at the enablers than
Exactly.
the person doing the lying.
So
So
it basically you can stabilize pro-social behavior by focusing on who's enabling the antisocial behavior.
interesting, very interesting. Rob and David.
Yeah.
I've been thinking that somewhere along in the history of capitalism, gossip got professionalized and commercialized. And I'm thinking about Hedda Gabler in Hollywood,
Mhm.
who was known as a gossip columnist,
Mhm.
which was commercializing the whole concept of gossip, and possibly the first you provide the war, you provide the reporting, I'll provide the war. It's sort of the beginnings of the intervention of media into spreading false information. In fact,
Mhm.
there was no war, but
Right.
the newspaper
Yeah.
was inventing it. So the social media now it's gone amok. And there was a point where with the early video cameras, personal video, this was going to liberate people and allow them to create their own movies and do that. And now it's huge industry, TikTok and Instagram and so on.
Mhm.
So I think that gossip has become professionalized.
Well, and one of the, I think again we're talking about how gossip has been monetized and turned into a commercial venture. We Americans are good at monetizing just about anything you can name, but we're particularly good at making money out of things that are hardwired into us by evolution. It also occurs to me that when I think about celebrity gossip, the content is usually about mating behavior in some sort. It's about who's dating who, or who's getting divorced from who, or who's been unfaithful to who. And I wonder, if why is so much of the celebrity gossip about that? Well, because we have a natural hardwired interest in mating behavior, including the mating behavior of competitors and people that are of high status, etc. So it's probably feeding something in us that is quite primal, if you will.
It
Dave,
includes
yeah, go
people who
ahead.
are in rehab.
Yes, that's also another angle as well. David, yes, you're muted, David.
There we go. Yeah, and obviously I'm multitasking here, so in the car and in the meeting. But yeah, just some some thoughts. I've been listening in on the conversation, and I had one. I'll say a couple things because I feel like I would take it in a different direction, and feel free, you
That's
Steve or
okay.
anybody else to just parking lot me. Yeah. So one thing in response to Sage's comment there is like the idea that it's the way to attack it is to shame the people who aren't holding up the norm. It just makes me think of like something I've thought about for a while is like, should we be like, sorry, this is all related to the election. Should we be shaming Trump voters for not upholding norms of honesty and all of that? And so that's one kind of interesting question, I think. And then, but then more broadly, and this, coming back to, I think you said something else about earlier, Steve, the maintaining the mechanisms for for maintaining like quality gossip or for not letting it get out of hand.
Mhm.
And kind of the question of how do we do that I'm glad Andy's not here because I'm going to admit I haven't read his book, Mental Immunity, but it seems to be related there, almost like, and I was thinking of it almost like as does there need to be like a public health approach to misinformation? Like, we have all these sort of vectors, these hidden places on the internet where, this stuff sort of foments and then it spreads out to other places. And of course, most of us, myself included, just avoid those places. We go to the places where we hear the stuff we like, but is it kind of up to us to be like, opening up the bringing going into the sewer and cleaning it out kind of thing, or shedding light,
Well, you're freezing a little bit, David.
Thinking about reason.
At least you were for me.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes, you're back. You're back. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Did the points at least come through, or?
Yes. And I don't think we can parking lot you because you appear to already be in a parking lot. So I don't think that's an option.
Lots of analogies here. Yeah.
The conversation is talking about misinformation and disinformation on the internet and the overlap with gossip. And my sense is there's probably like a Venn diagram. There are some types of misinformation and disinformation which probably would fit what we mean by gossip, and other types that might be better categorized as propaganda than gossip. And then there's a distinction between the two, I think. And at some point, by the way, in our conversation, I would love to bring this a little bit back to our personal lives and talk about gossip in the old-fashioned sense of what we do in our friendship networks and workplaces, and not have it entirely be about celebrity gossip or online gossip. So if that's interesting, we could do that. Sage, and
I'll just say though, if anybody has like thoughts or resources about like around that those ideas, because I am really curious right now as we come up to the election, like, are there people doing this? I've been like learning more about like the street epistemology.
Yes.
Stuff and yeah. So if anybody has thoughts, please just put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Sage, and then Hank.
Yeah, just a quick reaction. I think just to clarify that the whole the way that punishing or calling out the non-enforcers or the enablers comes in is as a way to is an explanation of how norms get maintained over time. Like, so when people are doing that, it, even if just a small few people are doing that, it can maintain a norm over a large group, because it'll maintain conformity. Because when people are taking steps to punish those who are breaking norms, then it'll be rare, and so people won't really want to do it. So I think it's actually, if you think about how do we change the norms of X group, whether that's Trump supporters or whatever, it's really actually it's more of like, what are the norms they have now, and how are they being enabled, and are there windows there? So that kind of street epistemology needs to get down to like, it can't just be replace this norm with that norm. It's more like, what is the reasoning behind having, certain like radical presences in the sense of like popular, like that kind of thing. Like there's actually something important there. So it's just a matter of changing, so it needs to come from the inside. So it's not something we could just sort of sit here and figure out theoretically.
Clearly, I think the norm in a small hunter-gatherer group was that I should not be spreading false information about others in the group. And that if I did that to excess, either in degree or in kind, there'd be consequences for me. The group would not be happy with me if I was continually telling you false information. So I think that's sort of hardwired into us. The group would come down on somebody that engaged in malicious false gossip a lot. And that does seem to be a check and balance that is weaker online than it would have been in small groups. Hank and then Diane.
Yeah, if I can extend the metaphor of gossip to conspiracy theories online or on paper, we can say, based on what Steve is saying, we can consider it gossip for a moment. Okay, it's a hypothesis. So I was reading this article, I can't remember the guy's name, but he come up with this term, the paranoid tilt. I don't know if everybody's heard that, but it's about the negativity bias, and that, you know, the negativity bias is based upon survival. If you think it's a stick or a snake, you go, I think it's a snake. Okay. So on a group level, you can have the paranoid tilt. And his article was about how the social media is facilitating or enhancing conspiracy theories, which are based upon the paranoid tilt, that everything out there is dangerous. And these theories, the conspiracy theories, all the gossip, suggest that there's real danger. And so you see the Trump movement, I don't like to give his name, but that movement towards the paranoid tilt is something that is not new in history, but it's always been there, but it's happening now. So if we call it gossip, I'm not sure what we're going to do about it, but I think the way Sage put it, at least we're trying to identify the norms. And this guy, the social psychologist, talking about it as the paranoid tilt.
Well, the
And
way
like-
to rephrase that, and we did a session of Examine Lives a couple of months ago on judgment under uncertainty.
That's right.
The paranoid tilt is another way of saying false positive errors are less costly than false negative errors. And maybe there's some connection between a sort of hardwired tendency to make false positive errors and gossip. There's some connective tissue there. I don't quite know how to express it, but it makes sense to me, Hank, that there'd be some connectivity there, I think. Diane.
Can I? Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Hank. Go ahead.
well, I just want to add that I think we've all agreed, and the literature suggests that the purpose of gossip is a kind of a pro-social thing, basically, if it works well.
Yep.
So I think we leave out that there's a particular, now this could be an artificial group, the MAGA group, whatever, doesn't matter, but whatever that's, it's a group without boundaries. And for some reason, some people want to belong to that group, whether it's wired, and some people want to belong to no group or other groups. But that suggests, again, it's about belonging and which group, if you want to join the mafia, you know, you're going to go with their norms and you do the stuff that will enable you to be a valued member in that group and move through the hierarchy.
And there'd be some serious sanctions for spreading false information in the mafia, I imagine. So.
Well, against norms, against their norms.
Right, okay. Diane.
Well, I had in mind suggesting a really sort of radical turn away from this information concentration, and
go for it.
David will be unhappy about this because it's going to shift the tone. But all my life, I was brought up with the sort of cliche that gossip is something that women do, the men don't do. And also most gossip was about women rather than about men. And I'm pretty sure that nobody in this group agrees with either of those things, but why were there such images, and what purpose or function do you think that they served?
Diane, I don't know if I want to phrase this as agreeing with it in the way you put it. However, in the Scientific American article, that was one of the resources for Day, it points out that there is research which shows that most of us gossip about people that are similar to us in age and gender. So there is data that women do tend to gossip about other women.
With women.
And men are more likely to gossip about competitors. Although I think men also will gossip about mating opportunities. I'll phrase that delicately.
Well, yes, and
Okay, so
that's
let's.
what made me say that most gossip was thought to be about women as well as
Yeah.
by
So
women.
let's rephrase it as a simple question that people could talk about. Do women gossip
My
more?
guess is that Kathleen wants to respond to that.
Okay. Do women gossip more than men? Kathleen and I've lost track here, but Kathleen, Rob, and Hank.
I'm pretty sure a lot of studies show that at least in contemporary American middle schools and high schools, reputation destroying is the main way that females punish one another, and that it differs from males. Now, I don't know how much is cultural, but I was just reading John Haidt's The Anxious Generation, and he talks about why it's so much more devastating for girls to participate in social media at a young age. And he says that this is the way that girls react or how they manage status. And it's really devastating because they can single someone out and exclude them and all the rest of it. I don't know why, but I'm just saying, I was just reading something that confirms that.
So is it, would a correct rephrase, Kathleen, of what you just said be that adolescent girls use gossip as a means of aggression more than adolescent boys do? Adolescent boys express aggression in other ways.
Yeah, that was the idea. And I would that maybe college professors do it, male and female.
Wait a time out.
I'm just throwing in a little observation about.
Oh, so you don't think it's just middle schoolers? You think
I'm joking. I was just throwing in a joke.
Okay. Rob?
College professors are pretty much emasculated, so I guess they do it to one another.
Well, we'll have to have a whole session on that, I think. I think David had his hand up next. So David, Rob, and Hank. You're muted, David.
There we go. Yeah, I won't take us off track this time. But no, I love. Sorry, Kathleen. You just put in there. So I was going to add to that about the gender differences. That journal article that you included, I think, talks about that, and I if I recall, part of what it said, and I'll have to look back, is that because just because of the difference between men and women, that the strategy for sort of sorting out status among men, it can be more like, tends to be more like physical, right? Like strength and aggression, and but then for women, because on average they are less physically physically strong, and that's not a useful strategy. But the better strategy for women is to do the sort of more indirect form of challenging and sorting out reputations that way, and so that's why you see it more among women than
it makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But sorry, so that's just a response to Kathleen there, but or bringing in that article. But then oh, and that article, yeah, just on that too, like it was like the more attractive, the more women felt threatened by attractive women, the more they would use gossip, right? That was part of the outcome. Sorry, so that's the response to Kathleen. Bringing back, or sorry, the thing I wanted to add to the conversation is this idea of being called out as a gossip, or like as a the gossip as a noun, and that's just something interesting, I think. And I don't know, I didn't get through all the reading, so if that came up anywhere, I'd be curious. But it's so interesting because like it's this strategy that's used, almost universally, and yet to have it come to light that you're using this strategy is this kind of shaming thing in and of itself, right? If you're a gossip, you could gossip about someone being a gossip, and that would ruin their reputation. It's kind of a funny.
David, that's a really excellent point. And I was thinking as you said that if you're being called a gossip, I think what it probably means is that you're not good at gossiping, because everybody else gossips and gets away with it. But if you're called out as a gossip, you're doing it in some kind of clumsy way that everybody is aware that you're doing it. And
or you're really just striving and like almost desperately
maybe
trying
too much. The Scientific American article, which is different than the one that you were just citing, but it also makes the point that mostly we gossip about social rivals. And that's why that's the underlying mechanism. I said a moment ago that article cited research that says we tend to gossip mostly about people that are similar to us in age and gender. That's because those are our social rivals. So in a competitive sense, the people whose reputation I want to manage are people that are competing with me for resources and mates. Those are the immediate social rivals whose reputations I'm concerned with. And so that's why I probably tend to, that we all do, not just me, that people tend to gossip about people similar to them in age and gender. So it makes
all of that article, just to add, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So the article did say that for men, most of the, because women select men based on usually more often based on their access to resources, that might tend to be something that where gossip would happen for men, but then for women, because men because faithfulness is more of an issue for men. Gosh, I'll have to remember how it was said, but because of that, then for women, it's more about actually things like promiscuity that would be the things that we're gossiped about. It's like, and it's sort of held as more of a shameful thing for women.
Yeah.
Because I think because men are under the threat that like it's harder to tell who the offspring are, right? Because for obvious reasons. Yeah. So it's interesting.
If I was going to gossip about you, David, and I want to damage your reputation in terms of the mating game, I would tell everyone that the Rolex on your wrist is a cheap knockoff, and you don't really have the resources to buy a real Rolex. That would be, a classic male reputation damage. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because Hal has not joined the conversation yet, and he has his hand up. So we'll go to Hal, and then Rob, and then Hank. And Crystal, feel free to join in if you have anything you want to say. You're welcome to. And yes, go ahead, Hal.
Yeah, okay. I think that mass-produced disinformation has blown gossip out of the water. It's like dwarfed the damage of normal gossip such as we've had in the past. And I think that to deal with it on social media would take something really structured like the immune system, where you see something coming in, you've got something constantly on the watch for incoming bullshit, and put something out to counter it the minute it's seen before most people even see it, which is what's been called pre-bunking instead of debunking. And this is what they did in Taiwan during the COVID epidemic, and they did extremely well, even though they're like probably the most vulnerable country in the world for disinformation, since China wants to gobble them up, and China is very good at disinformation.
Mhm.
But they got through 18 months of the COVID epidemic, having under a dozen deaths, and that's like unbelievable. But they did it through many means, including tracing where people were, having people voluntarily help in tracing where they've been, using their smartphones and checking into QR things that are posted all over everywhere you go.
Okay. Now,
well,
I'm gonna, in the interest of time, Rob.
Disinformation, dealing with the disinformation had to be a large part as well, I believe.
Yep. And again, we're, you know, there's overlap between gossip and mis and disinformation is an interesting topic. And as I said earlier, I think of it like a Venn diagram where there's differences and some similarities. Rob, and then Hank, and then Crystal. And then after that, we'll have to wrap up, but we are going to stay an extra half hour for people who want to. So Rob, Hank, and Crystal.
Two quick observations. One, hunter-gatherers and women gossip. If I understand correctly, the males were out hunting some of the time when they weren't lying around swapping lies.
You can gossip while you're hunting, can't you? Can't you
Well,
gossip while
usually
you're
their
hunting?
the hunting is either solitary or in pairs. They don't go in groups and hunt.
Okay.
Hunter-gatherers generally.
Okay.
So the women forage in groups because they're taking the children with them, and their tendency then would be to be conversing while they're digging up roots and so on. So I think there's a kind of these are generally speaking, they're not hard and fast, but generally speaking, the women are more collective and the men are more solitary. That doesn't mean they don't gossip, but so that's one
Okay.
reason perhaps that we have hardwired in that women are more inclined to be thought of as people who gossip.
Interesting.
The other observation is that having seen two daughters go through middle school, my sense is that they form triads and that the gossip is usually between two members of the triad. And usually there's one that's out and the other two are in. And that moves around all the time. And it's a source of incredible anxiety. And I'm not sure what the positive function of it is because it seemed really negative to me, but
Yeah.
I
Triangles are an
twice.
inherently unstable shape. Triangles. Hank, and then Crystal.
Yeah.
Very interesting comments, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to go to the personal, let's say, I will say, and I'll tell you why, but based on my background, I learned from my parents and their face-to-face groups about gossip. And that was, whom do you trust and who do you not? So I would hear, and my folks, my background is both of my folks come from a little shtetls in Poland, very face-to-face, very small, and also surrounded by Jew hatred. So, but I'm talking about the gossip amongst the in-group. And so I would know this one is, they didn't say it that way, but if they would complain about somebody, their attitude was you can't trust them. If they said nice things, you could trust them. So that was kind of useful.
Yeah, I think that's pretty similar to the function in a hunter-gatherer tribe. Hank. Yeah. Crystal.
Found this topic to be very interesting for us to talk about because I don't often get to be in circles talking about gossip, but it became particularly interesting to me because of the workplace and how it's played out. I know that one conversation I've had with a work colleague before shared a perspective where for males, they may have had a bigger build. And so physicality wise, they had different ways to be able to express harm if it was a negative approach that they wanted. And from a female side, they may not have had that. And so there could be some role in the tendency to to use more so verbal ways of inducing a bit of that harm. And so I found that to be a very interesting perspective in how we might lean towards a different approach towards it. But I also started realizing it became a gray area of trying to converse ideas between what is the personal life and what is a professional life, and wondering how we navigate those spaces. Because even in our comments, I'm seeing Chris mention we might have the intent of wanting to care for somebody. I've been in a lot of circles where they might mention some news, by the way, so-and-so is going through a hard time. Let's try not to bring it up in our next conversation. And that's coming from a very caring place. Yet it could also be from a very non-caring place. And so I think in those conversations, I think the definition of gossip becomes unclear to me. And I'm curious to kind of understand that and unpack that more, because I think of a lot of it playing a role around intent. And it's hard to know where people come from intent in that way. And so that's my comment to what we've been talking about so far, and just some thoughts that have been percolating for me.
That's fascinating, Crystal. The idea that the same piece of information, and your example is a good one, so-and-so is going through a tough time, that can either be negative or positive gossip, depending upon the intent, and the intent may be unstated. That's really, really interesting. Well, listen, in the interest of time, our new format is that we formally wrap up, as we always did, at the hour. But the new model is that the facilitator and those people that are interested will stay on for another half hour. I do have a hard stop in 30 more minutes, so that's what we'll do. Before folks do sign off, though, keep in mind that next month, Diane is going to be leading a discussion on siblings. And in December, Andy Norman is going to be leading a discussion on Daniel Dennett, who recently died, and his legacy for evolutionary science. And we haven't picked topics past that, but we're good through the end of the year at least. So those of you who have to depart, feel free. Thank you for coming. And those of you who want to stay on, and we can chat a little bit further, and maybe we can talk more about gossip in our own lives and personal lives and at workplaces and friendship groups compared to online. That would be interesting to me, at least. So take care, everyone.